Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Jessie Robertson, and I'm Curator of Exhibitions and Live Programmes here at Modern Art Oxford. I am really delighted to welcome you to this In Conversation event with Frieda Toranzo Jaeger and Larne Abse Gogarty to celebrate the opening of Frieda Toranzo Jaeger, A Future in the Light of Darkness. This exhibition is the first solo presentation of Toranzo Jaeger's work in a UK institution. It features new and recent works, including some of her most ambitious large-scale modular canvases, alongside a number of smaller-scale intimate pieces. Taking painting and its history as both her medium and subject, Toranzo Jaeger's paintings of driverless cars, engines, and spacecraft explore hybridity and automation to imagine alternative, post-capitalist and decolonized futures. Toranzo Jaeger lives and works in Mexico City. She's had a recent solo exhibitions at MoMA PS1 in New York, Gallery Barbara Weiss in Berlin, Baltimore Museum of Art, Arcadia Misa in London, and also High Art in Paris and Rena Spallings in New York. A major installation was recently acquired by the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, and very excitingly, Frieda will present a significant new commission at the 60th International Art Exhibition of the Venice Biennale, which opens on the 20th of April. Dr. Larne Abse Gogarty is a writer and head of history and theory of art at the Slade School of Fine Art, University College London. She is the author of What We Do Is Secret: Contemporary Art and the Antinomies of Conspiracy, which was published in 2023 by Sternberg Press, and also Usable Pasts, Social Practice and State Formation in American Art, published by Brill in 2022. Frieda and Larne will speak for around 35 to 40 minutes, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions before we head upstairs at 6 o'clock for a special preview of the exhibition ahead of the PV party, which kicks off at 6:30. You'll see that this event tonight is being BSL interpreted by the wonderful Claire. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Jessie, for the introduction. Can everyone hear me? Okay. And thanks for the invitation to join this evening. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to Frieda about this really great show. I thought maybe we can open... I have some specific questions, having come from just having had a wander around the exhibition, which I'd like to get onto. But maybe we should open with a kind of introduction from you around some of the central themes or ideas that you're working with in this show.
First of all, thank you everyone for coming. Is this working? Okay. I think there's a very broad ideas in the show, because I have pieces from 2017 until 2023, so it's a very long history of ideas within my work. But I guess one of the main ideas is like the car. The car interiors for me have been a very relevant topic. I think they function for me as a way to symbolize a psychological space where capitalism lives and how capitalism performs itself. Driving a car is an action that is passive, but at the same time is very active. It's an action that also we can decide how fast do we go, where do we go, but we are still constrained by roads, we're still constrained by traffic laws and all of that. So I feel that this is a little bit where we are at. When we are within capitalism, we benefit from it and we are oppressed by it at the same time. So we are constrained by capitalism in all our movements, thoughts and ideas, but at the same time we have still some agency of where to go, how fast to go, and where are all these things heading towards.
Maybe I'll follow on from that description of the car, which runs throughout the show. Maybe I'm going to kind of just move through these a little bit for a moment as we're talking. So those of you who haven't who aren't familiar with Frieda's work can begin to get a bit of a taste for it before we go and look at it upstairs. One of the things that struck me that we talked about just now was in these works and throughout the whole show, you're working with a range of media. So you're a painter, but the paintings often are made in these theatrical kinds of almost stage set like ways, which I want to talk a little bit more about that theatrical quality later on. Within the works, there's also repeated use of embroidery. So for those of you that can't tell from the image, hopefully you can, the foliage and the roses are embroidered, the car is painted. And I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about that, about your relationship to painting and to embroidery. One of the things that struck me was the way that the car is never embroidered. So this object that, as you just said, seems in some way for you emblematic of the space for capitalism. The car is never rendered through embroidery, but is always painted. The kinds of material that is embroidered is repeatedly natural material, foliage, flowers. People are embroidered as well. There's also these beautiful kind of representations of hearts that are embroidered on some of the work. So yeah, I suppose it's a question about what kind of decision making goes on in terms of what's embroidered. How does embroidery relate to the painted elements within the works? And yeah,
I guess for me, if I take like the idea of painting in the Western canon, painting becomes a conceptual space. I mean, at the very end of the day, painting is just, couple of colors and pigments onto a surface. I mean, they look like a car, but they're still just a surface. So painting becomes like an interlocutor between our ideas that we are projecting into the surface in ourselves. So painting moves itself in the realm of concepts, of ideas, of systems. So that's why the cars or the interiors of the cars are always painted, because for me they are a psychological space. They're a space of ideologies. They're a space of concepts. Whereas embroidery, I work with my family to do this embroidery. It's a type of embroidery that has been passed from women to women through generations in my house. So now I collaborate with my family to do all the embroideries in my work. And I think the idea of embroidery comes from a total different genealogy, right? It comes from a genealogy of crafts, of female labor, of ornamentation, as if it within itself didn't have any conceptual or ideological meaning. So what I try to do is then try to intertwine these two genealogies, like the idea of painting, of the preciousness of painting, and then the genealogy of embroidery as a craft, as a, in my case, as a, Mexican pre-Columbian technique that has survived all of these years through women. So for me, I try to put them, the two together, to try to break the hierarchies of value, to break the hierarchy also of painting. Why is painting so precious and why is embroidery not? And so when I bring them together, I think I'm just, trying to disrupt these categories that we attach them in terms of value. And I also think sometimes in my paintings, embroidery wants to be embroidery, right? I think the car wants to stand for something else, right? Like for a space of capitalism, a space of control, a space of why do we are afraid of, that the losing control. But embroidery in my paintings wants to be embroidery. It wants to be embroidery because it's really determined to be what it is.
So when Frieda and I met earlier in the week, and one of the things that we talked about a bit there, and it's also something that I've picked up on from looking at your titles, both of shows and of works, is that you have this interest in autonomy. So you had an exhibition at Arcadia Missa a few years ago called Fantasies of Autonomy, or the show you had at MoMA was called Autonomous Drive. Autonomy as a term in relation to art history or art practice is a fraught one. Of course, there's endless claims within the history of modernism that art should be autonomous, that it should not be subjected to a relationship with forms of patronage, with the church, that the part of the process of secularization of art involves a move towards art being autonomous. The myth of the artist as a kind of social figure is also bound up with the idea of the artist as autonomous from, say, I don't know, the strictures of wage labour, something like that. Autonomy also obviously has political valences. You might talk about wanting to be autonomous from the state, or to exist autonomous from other forms of power structures. And, the way in which these two meanings of autonomy within art and autonomy within politics, kind of crisscrosses in really interesting ways. It doesn't always align neatly. But it feels to me, well, it's clear it's something important to you in terms of your repeated reference to it. The root of autonomy is, to think about the auto, the self, the automatic, the car, like self-determining in some ways. So I just would love to hear you talk a little bit more about how you relate to this category of autonomy, what it means to you, and what it means for you to kind of weave it through your practice and your making.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I think autonomy as a concept is a fantastic one, because I think you understand, as I do, and many of us do, that it's almost impossible to live, autonomous from the capitalistic system. I mean, maybe there's a way, I don't know, but I think this idea of also like self-dependence is also like really, really dangerous. But I think what I mean when I really try to focus on the idea of autonomy, it's first the idea of imagining a self that is outside the post-colonial, right? I think there is also this idea that even if you imagine yourself like, okay, I want to be an artist, so how can I be an artist? And then you think like Gerard Richter, like whatever, like just an artist. And then you see the things that he did. And then, you're just like, well, it would be amazing if I could do the same things. So that's exactly the idea that I want to, kind of move away from. How can we do art within the system, but imagine us in another one? So what I do is like gestures of autonomy, right? Like the idea of just like me going and, painting a luxury car that I have never seen in my life, and give me the agency as a woman, as a Mexican woman, to be just like, you know what, I'm going to talk about cars. I know very little about them, in a mechanical sense, but why not? Why not? Why can I not give myself this agency of thinking about the most technological stuff, the most futuristic futures, the most futuristic ideas? So I think that for me is a gesture of autonomy, and it came from the idea of pimping your car, right? Like when someone buys a very fancy car, but they pimp it, they are trying to separate themselves through ornamentation from the rest. And I thought this gesture, that obviously we know how intertwined it is with so many other things, was very empowering. So I thought this is a little bit what I sometimes do. Like I pimp my paintings sometimes with a lot of shiny stuff. And but what I mean is, it's just about that. It's about these gestures that we do, specifically a lot of people in the diasporas and a lot of people like living other realities from the West. We ornament ourselves also in a way to separate us from the machine that is kind of building us all in the same direction. Because neocapitalism wants to homogenize us, like in a very oppressing way. So yeah, ornaments or, all of these things become like really, like they come with an otherness that I'm like really interested in. So I think, yeah, it's a fantasy, it's a performance that I try to always intertwine in my work, because I think it's important to imagine ourselves as persons of color in the living in the global South, having a different future than the one that everyone is expecting us to have. And that imagination, for me, is also an exercise of autonomy.
Can you say something more? You said that this is also, I mean, you started to talk about it, that this is also about a relationship to imagining what the post-colonial is. And in terms of what you're talking about, that idea of like ornamentation, adornment of a kind of like a transformation of an existing commodity in order to transform it, to kind of claim an ownership or a difference for it from the use or the thing it was intended for. It would be interesting to hear you talk more about that in relation to like an imaginary of what the post-colonial is, and also that in relation to, for example, some of the ways in which your work is very specifically thinking about, I don't know if I want to say utopia. I don't know if that's a word that would resonate with you, but something after capitalism, like this word, end of capitalism, the fountain, where it feels like there's this sort of this scene that is both abundant, but also got these kinds of leftover bits and pieces, like a car seat, the tires, this are propellers, right? So yeah, like the relationship between these sort of micro gestures of ornamentation of the existing and some idea of the future, and what do you do with what the world leaves you with, or something like that?
Yeah, I think what I'm most dissatisfied with is the idea that colonial ideas colonize our imagination as well. We spend our days thinking how to get a better job, how to earn more money, how this could be better, right? But I think we don't spend our time in our inner worlds imagining something completely detached from it. So I think beyond criticizing like capitalism or like the colonial structures that are today at play, which I think automatically happens naturally, I also like to propose things. I just like to propose these types of imaginary. How would it look like? What will happen? So this is, for example, a painting that is based on a 1500 painting of Lucas Cranach the Elder. And it's a painting about the fountain of youth. So basically, on the left side, the older women will enter the fountain, and on the right side, they will come out as beautiful young women. So this is a male fantasy based on like horrible structures. But I like this painting because it has a democratic composition in it, meaning there is not a protagonist. Each character, can have a line of narration, and no one is kind of more important than the other. So that painting was for me very important because of that. And I also think that now that a lot of uncertainties are coming and a lot of predictions of insecurity and climate change and wars, it's very present. I also want to propose presents and futures where chaos can coincide with joy, where crises can give rise to a lot of change, maybe in a positive way, and also, forms of fulfillment. New structures of acknowledgement, new structures of support. So this is a little bit what I imagine, right? There's a lot of chaos. There is it's not very controlled environment. It's an environment where things are falling, things don't work, but everybody is just kind of enjoying a bath together. And I just think these two realities can coexist. So, I think, utopia might be not the right word, because I think
it's not as optimistic.
It's not as optimistic. I mean, there's going to be chaos.
Yeah.
And, with chaos, there come also a lot of negative things. But I guess that's the idea, that within these negative things, number one, we learn how to deal with that. And then number two, that it's not the only thing that's going to exist. So this is a little bit like a proposition around that. And obviously, it's very ornamented. I think also embroidery in itself is an ornament, right? Yeah. So, and there's a lot of things that, like little pots and, things that you would think they're not necessities in this way. Yeah. But that there's a relationship with ornament where it's a source of, nourishment or something more internal than our actual exterior needs.
Yeah, it's also interesting to think about that again in terms of like a history of aesthetics where ornament has tended to be, or a Western history of aesthetics where ornament has tended to be denigrated as feminine, as foreign, as not kind of meeting the ambitions that fine art sets for itself. So to put that into a scene like this and to sort of insist on its place within a moment that, or a scene that is trying to render something about chaos and pleasure and, I don't know, and beyond the world we're in now, seems really interesting. Okay, let's, I really love these two. There's something very, like, playful about both of them, or almost silly about particularly life fears. It's the combination of, like, I don't know, a kind of mundane existential fear with this little Pomeranian slipping down its seat into a pit of fire. That feels very... These two, when I looked them upstairs, they felt they're next to each other, and they're not close next to each other, but they're on the same wall. And there was something about the two of them that felt to me like they are working within this sort of dream space or like imaginary space without it being an imaginary space that's about having to imagine what the world is like after the end of capitalism. Like, it's a more prosaic kind of imaginary space. So I just suppose I wanted to ask you to talk about the little.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are like lighter paintings, like I tend to be very dense. So sometimes I have to like have more of, like, a different type of fun. But I guess, because capitalism is a machine of insecurity. It's always making us feel like, oh, you're going to lose that, or you have to do that or this. So I just imagine myself like I was in the car with a dog, and I was just like, what is this dog thinking? Like, he cannot comprehend what's going on. Like, I was just like, maybe sometimes we feel like that. We feel like we are pushing to situations that are going very far, that we are stuck in. And then we remember that we are just full of fear. And we feel like this little Pomeranian, which is just really afraid of life. of what's happening in anybody's in any moment's life. So I also think it's really cute. I mean, I love Pomeranians. And this other is a much recent work, and this is taking on the symbol of the heart, which I use very often in my work. And the symbol of the heart for me symbolizes kind of love and desire as a one thing, which I think it's also what gives us like this total insatisfaction. We cannot differentiate between love and desire, right? And I think also like all the social media adopting the heart, because now it's not a like, it's a love. So how social media is just pushing you to stop seeing these two things separate from one another. And I think, my proposition is like, we just want so much to be loved, we become very tight. So this is like a proposition of hearts opening, like quite literally as a performative, symbol of like, we have to stop seeing desire and love as the same. I think if we think about love, for example, in terms of need, we will not be so unsatisfied. We will just be just like, this is just what I need. And then we will not be, desire one thing after the other, because once you have a desire, then the next one arises. So that's why, I think desire is a disaster. I mean, most of my hearts are on the floor. They are like... So sometimes, desire takes you to very disastrous places. So this is a little bit of, opening a heart, like as a performative idea.
Well, I think that connects with like the way in which so many of the works feel very inviting. The work at the end of the gallery, which you'll see upstairs, so it's a column that is then the red is embroidery, and it's kind of separating these two halves of the canvas, or this one of the heart on the floor, or if we go back a little, this is very large, and you're sort of like having to move around it, make a decision, like how close do you want to get to this? And so the work like endlessly invites this sort of it's inviting in that way that you described. You want the heart to be open or something that has this sort of theatrical quality to it. So and at various points when we've been talking, you've mentioned an interest in like the performative or wanting it, but I suppose it really struck me in looking at the work that I kept thinking of like they're more specifically theatrical in some way than just performative. Performative has become a very kind of amorphous sort of term, whereas they seem to have something specific about them. I was also thinking about that in relation to the way that you're working with other people. So you're working with your family, and theatre, usually involves more than a single person, which fine art tends to exist within this model of it's an artist on their own making work. So yeah, it feels this idea of like need comes through really strongly in the work through the way it asks for a kind of engagement from the person walking around the gallery in terms of a decision about how close you get to it. It invites you in, but also that you're dependent on other people in making this. Like you can't do all this embroidery on your own. So it would be interesting to you talk a little bit more about that relationship you have with other people when making the work. Upstairs there's also these 4 works that open and close, these mechanical boxes. And you described that process of working with other people there differently to how you talked about the embroidery. Yeah. So maybe you can talk about that.
I mean, I work with my family. It's very toxic. I mean, we all know, like family structures are so toxic, and I like them and everything, but we just end up in these situations where I'm just like, what? But I I like that. I think as emotionally draining as it is sometimes, it moves itself more in the realm of the emotional and not the corporative, which is kind of maybe something that I'm interested in. And I like that my works invites the body. That's why I also work in big formats, because I want people to fit their bodies in. I like also to paint things with my body, so I also like to make body size paintings. But I think you're right. I mean, I think I also don't take myself so seriously sometimes, and I'm just like, yeah, they become like a backstage for actually, these ideas that I have, right? I think I use painting as the means and not the end. So I'm not so interested, for example, in technique. I think when you approach a painting and you are just like, oh my God, how was it done? I think that's already the wrong question. You should approach this painting and be just like, what the fuck? Why is this here? Why does this matter? And then I think from that question, other questions can arise. And I find that much more interesting than just being obsessed of like how people done this. I am a painter that has learned by doing, not very obsessed with the labor of it, because I think I'm a Marxist. I don't like to work, like I don't want to push myself into horrible work. But yeah, I think it's a performative, because I think the paintings want to be like something else. That's why also they move, some of them close and have like different modalities, because the painting wants to, like perform itself in a way also that it's a little bit ironic of itself, like a little bit of a backstage painting.
Yeah, maybe we can just, as you're saying that, I think there's a slide of the, yeah, so this is a good example of what you're talking to. So you'll see it upstairs, but it's an altarpiece, and closed, that's how it looks, and then it opens up. Which, in being an altarpiece, obviously also suggests your very kind of intense relationship to art history, and the way in which throughout many of these paintings you have these references to other painters, to other artworks, to other kinds of traditions of making. Maybe I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to open up to anyone else who'd like to ask some questions. I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about these two works, which are relatively recent, and they take these calla lilies from Diego Rivera. We talked about it. Who's more famous, Diego Rivera or Frida Kahlo?
Yeah.
I feel outside of Mexico, Frida Kahlo, but you were saying within Mexico, Rivera, which is really interesting. But you've taken them from Rivera. They are kind of invading these car spaces in the way that is a repeated motif within many of the paintings. This one is embroidered, right? The bottom part here, and the hand at the top. So yeah, it would be great to hear you talk a little bit about this specific engagement with Rivera through this very recognizable kind of paintings he makes with these calla lilies, with his hands holding these huge bouquets.
Yeah, I think my relationship with Rivera is a really heavy one, because as a Mexican artist, you're always put in relationship or like in conversation, or there's always like this umbrella over you that, you have to deal with your own iconographies. And because they are so little, for the Western art world, it just feels heavy. It's like a heavy tradition, right? Like I feel like sometimes as a person of the global South, you're really pushed to represent your culture. Like in a weird stereotypical way, which I'm really like not like I'm really trying to separate myself from those kinds of practices. I mean, personally. But I also thought about the feeling when you're in a car and somebody just, and you're driving and somebody drops you out something like really quickly and Hannah just like drop it into the car. And for me, it's just this idea of like, we have to drop these expectations. As an artist, we can create new iconic, we can revisit all the other histories, right? I mean, even from the same time, obviously, I love Frida Kahlo. I mean, she's an iconic superstar. But, when you have Diego Rivera as the painter of Mexico, it's just something that people also don't want to question what his politics were. Or, all the misogyny around him. Or all of this. So sometimes I'm just like, I have to separate myself from these iconographies that have been kind of imposed into me. And this is a little bit what this represents, like me just being like, just drop it. I'm out of here. To just drop it, I'm gonna go somewhere else. So for me, these flowers, that's what they represent. They represent the idea of trying to drop this, impose iconography and move forward.
Thank you, Frida. Okay, I think we can turn to see if anyone's got any questions. Yeah?
Yes, two really. Sorry. You talked you talked about using the heart quite a bit. Now, I've spent quite a lot of time in Mexico. The heart is very important.
Yes.
In Mexico, isn't it? So there's a sort of, on the one hand, you talk about wanting to be different, and yet you are integrating what is effectively a cultural tradition to a certain extent. And then my other question is about the end of colonialism. I was just slightly perplexed, I suppose. You talk about wanting the end of colonialism. I mean, yet you're showing older women being transformed into young women. And that's what we're surrounded with, the image of the old not being beautiful and wanting to look young. And I just wondered what your feeling was about that.
I mean, I have to say, in the painting, there is no distinction. It's like, as you can see, there's people from many different types of body. And I mean, the painting is really not about the being youthful or transforming in youth, but the idea of diversity, of everybody coming together into like a full...
The reference to that was the reference to the painting that you're riffing on.
Yeah, and I try to change, to appropriate it so I can change its meaning from within. And I think the heart is a very universal symbol. It's also not an image, it's a symbol. So its meanings are very constrained in our understanding on the symbol. So I think, obviously it's very part of my heritage or my culture, which I also bring in the embroidery. What I'm saying is like, I don't want to fall into the stereotype of the white gaze of my own culture.
It's one in the front here. I think if you can wait for the microphone, please. Sorry. Yeah. Do that, and then we'll do it. Yeah.
You mentioned about ornamentation and otherness, and I was just wondering whether you could just elaborate on this a bit more, in particular with the rhinestones, and also I was wondering about the Pomeranian and like a relation to like kitsch and ornamentation and otherness as well. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I do have a relationship with kitsch. I just love it. I mean, it's part of my life. So I guess I love the rhinestones. I guess it's also like in Mexico, we have this subculture of like a mafia wife aesthetic, which I really love. I'm very part of this music scene. So this is where I get my inspo from. And then I think the Pomeranian is just because I just love them. They're just ridiculous. But yeah, I also think that it's quite interesting that all of these things that we sometimes specify as kitsch or as, they're, first of all, being really linked to the feminine. And then second of all, also linked to like that they don't have any meaning, or that they are like kind of dumb or empty of any kind of complexity. And I think that's not the case at all. So I just really try to bring kind of these kitsch motifs into these paintings also because when they become painting, then they become like subjects of conceptualizing within the medium. So I think that's also what I try to do. I try to take these things seriously.
There was a question in the second row here, and then one behind.
Thanks. Yeah, I was interested in your concept of autonomy that you were talking about, because if I understood rightly, you were talking about autonomy in the sense of being free from the constraints of capitalism. And so your choice of the car is an interesting one, because certainly in the UK, I don't mean, but that's often viewed as a symbol of autonomy in the sense of individualism, as opposed to collectivism. So we can choose where and when we drive, as you say, rather than having to wait for a train or go on public transport. So is there not some sort of contradiction in your use of the car as a symbol there, given its association with individualism, as opposed to the sort of more collective kinds of society which you seem to be thinking of as being more desirable than the sort of individualistic capitalism?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I just think that we are really constrained by capitalism right now. So there is not a lot of options. So we have to think what to do within it. So I guess, it goes both ways. To get out of it, you have to, do something from the inside. And then, then you can propose something else. But that's exactly, I mean, the car is a place of individualism, and that's what capitalism wants from us. It also doesn't let you see that we are all interdependent. Like I have also this piece, this altar, and it's like the car, and then in the windows, there is this altar painting of Hans Hamling from the 1500s, and it's the apocalypse. Because it also makes you like you're comfortable within your car. So why should I care about the outside? So it's totally this space, because I really want to elaborate on this space first, because this is where we're at, and then trying to free ourselves.
Cool.
Hi, Frieda. Thank you so much. I have to say, the person I see in front of me feels like a philosopher. And I'm really interested, maybe this is like a chicken and egg question, but I wonder what comes first for you, the art or the philosophy, because the two things seem to me to inform one another. And I wonder whether you put the brush to the canvas and the philosophy comes through that, or whether the philosophy informs the composition. And I'm thinking of the way that, sometimes when we see works and we hear artists, they're kind of asking an audience to kind of analyze their work and see what they see. But you have such insight into your work, and it seems so intentional. So I just would really love to know more about you, because, as I say, I see you as philosopher as much as artist.
Thank you. No, I mean, I have to say, my work can be interpreted in any way. I also, want to give you, I think I have, like you say, I have very strong intentions. But if it ends up in another meaning, I'm also happy with that, I have no restraints in that sense. But I have to say, I think more of my work in a conceptual way. So I think I have the concept and then I do the painting. I mean, obviously everything informs itself and then the painting itself will inform me of a new idea. But if we want like a little answer, like I would say first comes the concept.
Sorry to ask another question. I know this is really greedy, but so do you have a background in philosophy? Because you feel really informed, really the way that you're thinking about things are so deeply nuanced, and I just wonder how that translates into then the work.
Not formally. Yeah, I like to read.
Well, the question was asked so close to what I was saying. That was absolutely fascinating and sensed between. Can you speak more loudly, please? Sorry. That was so fascinating. It was touched on a lot of things I would say, so I won't repeat them. But you are so eloquent. You are amazing. And I was thinking, what was she like as a little girl? God, they're so comfortable with all of your creativity, and you can explain it to us in a way that so many artists can't, and yet they can identify with what you're saying. And the other thing is, I was fascinated because to me, as a very old artist now, you are a shining example of an artist of our time, because you're at home with all the media that is a world of magic to me. And so I am isolated and apart in wonder, not by choice, but by age. And so it's so wonderful to hear you explain, and I will come back when there are no people, because I really like to see how a work speaks to me. So I won't come to this, but I'm so glad I've experienced your talk and you who asked wonderful questions, and then let her speak because you have your own areas of expertise. So thank you for a wonderful experience.
Thank you. Question there. Okay. All right. Well.
Hello. Okay, yeah, it's Matt here. Thank you for your presentation. I think a lot of sentences that you spoke resonated with me, like capitalism is a machine of insecurities, and also how it colonized our imagination as well and our aesthetics. And I really wanted to know, how do you achieve this kind of freedom from this colonization, intellectual or imaginary, conceptual colonization? How do you refresh your ideas? How do you keep yourself out of these predetermined concepts and this kind of aesthetics that has been practiced by other people, other artists?
Thank you. I mean, I think I have not. I have not reached that point. I wish. I think one of my main sources of inspiration is also history. I mean, some really crazy things happen in history. So sometimes you can go back and find crazy utopic moments. I mean, you are more expert than me, but the really crazy things happen in history. So I try to go to those histories, and I think I found, for example, a lot of my kind of inspiration comes from the 1500s and 1400s, because painting at that time did not have perspective. So people were finding out how to tell stories, how to do it. Everything was really flat. I mean, so, for example, I'm very inspired by that, because as it looks to me, I'm not a Catholic person. I didn't grow up with that, thank God. So So for me, it's like a very interesting source of inspiration. Right? There were a lot of crises. And then how did people dealt with that crisis? What kind of images they were doing? I think that's, I mean, for me, that's how I try to do it. And also looking at the future. I like the future. I like to think that I can construct images of the future and don't let the future be constructed for me.
Thanks, Frieda. That was really great. I also have two questions, but I'll try and make them short. The first one, as an artist who's exhibited internationally, especially within the Western art system, how do you kind of make sure that your work is taken in a particular context, although you want to invite every meaning, but you're very intentional about it not being taken as like, I'm a Mexican artist representing Mexico. And two, you were talking about your studio practice and how you're kind of a Marxist and you're like, I don't want to do that much work. Can you give us a bit of insight into your studio practice? How much time you take? What is rest for you? Yeah, I just want to know a bit more about that.
I mean, I rest a lot. I think rest is part of my practice. It's quite literally like that, because I don't think an exhausted mind or body can be creative. That's another part of why capitalism doesn't let us be creative about our futures, because we're all exhausted because we all work a lot. So, I mean, now that I overcome my financial restraints that I had growing up, and now that I, can sustain myself, rest is part of my practice. This is bottom line. And I work as minimal as I can. I don't work Saturdays. I don't work Sundays. I go to the studio 5 to 7 hours max, and I work totally alone. I work in a very small space, and yeah, I mean, I think it's very important for me, because I think also you will see it in my practice. I just one idea, other idea. I don't like repeating myself so much. I don't find it. I find it a little bit boring. And what you say about being an international artist and being put in all of these categories, for example, also as a queer woman, for me, it's also very important not to be put in that category, because identity for me is a dialectical process. It's always changing. So it's really hard for me to be just I'm that. I mean, it seems crazy, So I try to be more complex about it. Of course, the geography, everything that had happened to me in my life is in my body, in my ancestry, in my blood, but it is very complex. I don't know how to explain it myself, so I could not explain it to anyone else. And so, yeah, and it's horrible. I try not to be put in boxes, but sometimes I am. And I have to deal with that and be depressed and angry.
Thank you so much, Frieda. Really enjoy the paintings, that whatever little we have seen. My question is more about your philosophical backing, and that's because my interest is also in decolonial research from a legal perspective, completely different. I really wanted to know, when you're talking about a post-colonial reimagination of the world and taking so many of the inspirations but also pushing away the Mexican influence, which part of the world are you reimagining when you're trying to make that into art? It might not necessarily show in the art, because this seems like an interstellar space. But in your mind, are you reimagining Mexico? Are you reimagining Western parts of the world? Are you reimagining just global South? So it would be interesting to know your thought process.
So, I mean, I think I'm imagining the global South, because I also sometimes I think that's a lot of responsibility, but I think it's because it's non-specific. For example, I have a painting of a volcano because I'm very obsessed by the fact that Mexico City was built really close to a volcano. And I think to myself, who will do that? But if we think about it, the volcano had a function. It was a function for the spiritual world and not for the material. So yeah, obviously you want to be close to it. So, I mean, these things that I just think like this is so beautiful because we don't do so many things for our internal worlds. Like we don't have tools to interact with our internal world sometimes. So I try to imagine like the global south where people are just, living in precarious situation and systematic ideologies are super hard to fight. So I think, that's, if you fight it there, you can fight it anywhere. So that's where I'm imagining it. But it's a little bit non-specific.
Yeah.
Maybe we take one more question. Yeah.
Hi, Frieda.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your generous conversation. Really enjoyed your idea of imagination as an exercise into autonomy and also sort of like breaking free from the post-colonial debris that we're living in. I was quite interested when you said that you look a lot back at the history and there's like a lot of crazy things that happened in history that sort of like feed into your work as sort of like tools for imagination. And quite interested in your ideas around sort of like hope in the light of darkness. How does it feel, sort of like, this might be a very big question, but sort of like having the show open in the midst of sort of like genocide happening in Palestine right now? Not necessarily, I'm not seeking for an answer, but just sort of like positionality and rather talking about hope, talking about these capitalist structures that are actually causing this damage in the first place. But yeah,
it feels horrible. My heart is broken. But, I think the most heavy thing of all of this is like that we are numb. I think I would rather have a straight up, very aligned, broken heart than being numb. Because violence and, genocide and all of this is just, it's numbing us. We are not caring. So obviously I feel terribly depressed and, very suspicious of like, there are like countries that support that, institutions that support that, suspicious of institutions not positioning themselves, and et cetera, et cetera. I feel very suspicious about all of this. But is it new? No. Then that's the thing. I am totally pro-ceasefire, free Palestine, but this is not new. And I just think that if we let this happen, then the next one will come. And then the next one will come. And and most probably, Europe will be fine. But maybe, it's me. It's my family, It's, so I think I feel all of that. I also thought like, well, that's why it's very important to talk about these things. To still, like I said, like in the midst of broken heartedness, find other ways of hope and resistance. Because also if we just get depressed, we're not going to resist. So, we have to resist.
It's a nice way to end. Thank you very much, Frieda.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'd like to invite you all to go upstairs to see the exhibition now. So Joe's just opening the doors up there. If you want to grab your stuff and go up there. Thank you.